The census of 1841 showed an Irish population of over 8 million, at least 1/3 of which lived almost exclusively on the potato. This crop is easy to cultivate and grows prolifically and provides a healthy if boring diet. Consequently, people married young, had large families, and subdivided their lands amongst their sons. Poverty was widespread, but so long as there were potatoes, there was food for all. Then in September 1845, the crop was struck by a mysterious blight. It recurred in succeeding years. The failure of the potato produced hardship throughout Europe, but in Ireland the situation was uniquely catastrophic. Millions faced starvation. It is much debated whether there was enough food in the country to feed the destitute, but in any case the problems of distribution would have been insurmountable. The recently established poor law system was quite unable to cope with a disaster of such magnitude. Only massive government intervention could save the day. But the response at Westminster to yet another wave of the Irish begging bowl was reluctant, muddled and often inappropriate. Private relief organisations, especially the Society of Friends, did heroic work and undoubtedly saved many lives. The landowners were the natural channel for the distribution of government relief, but Westminster distrusted the Irish landlords as arrogant exploiters of their tenantry. In practice, landlords reacted in different ways to the crisis. Lismore produced a good landlord and a bad one. Usher Kiley took advantage of the famine to clear his estate at Ballysaggett Moor of dozens of starving tenant families who could not pay the rent. On the other hand, the Duke of Devonshire contributed generously to the relief schemes, and his agent, Francis Curry, ran the Devonshire estates with efficiency, kindness and justice. Sir Richard Musgrave of Turin also worked energetically to stave off total disaster. Applications for charity, for relief work and for reductions were dealt with promptly, and there were few evictions. Owing to the huge number of deaths, especially from typhus and relapsing fever, the existing graveyards became a health risk. So the Duke of Devonshire presented 2 acres to the Roman Catholic clergy, in which the victims could be buried. The famine graveyard remains today a grisly reminder of the local impact of the greatest catastrophe in Irish history. There have been far worse natural disasters than that of 1845 to 1849. But the Irish famine was unique in that it took place in a fully modern, industrialised country. The poorest state in Irish society, the courtiers and landless labourers, were virtually obliterated, and the population continued to decline right through to the 1960s. The number of victims is unknown. Probably 1 million died, and at least another 1 million emigrated. These exiles blamed Britain for their misfortune and formed an overseas empire of hate, which would remain a thorn in Britain's flesh for many years to come. The parochial house in the South Mall in Lismore, and it is reputed that the author Conan Doyle is said to have resided here. The housing here on the South Mall, along this wide and elegant roadway, was again planned and constructed during the urban developments undertaken on the estate up to 1832. The Duke of Devonshire spread the cost of construction amongst his tenantry by having housing in this area erected to 3 life leases by the tenants. Cavendish House is a beautiful example of an early 19th century home. The well-preserved Doric doorcase should be noted. A view of the Church of Ireland Cathedral and the Knockmildown Mountains exists at this point from the South Mall. The elegant expanse of the green and lime-lined North Mall provides a valued amenity area for Lismore town today. This spacious avenue to the cathedral was first opened in 1726. There has been a consecrated building on this site since St. Carthage built his original monastic church in 635. The building has changed over the centuries, but for 1300 years worship has continued almost uninterrupted, making this one of the oldest Christian sites in Europe still flourishing. Having arrived here with his monks in 635 AD, St. Carthage established a monastery on this site, this founding the town of Lismore. Throughout the 8th and the 9th century, the monastery known as the University of Lismore became famous as a centre of learning and holiness, where monks from across Europe studied. A stained glass window by the pre-Raphaelite artist Edward Burne-Jones, dedicated to Francis Curry, the famine-era agent of the Duke of Devonshire in Lismore, whose relief work saved many lives. In the year 812, this great university was attacked by the Vikings. It was then attacked 5 more times in the next 100 years. By the mid-12th century, it was in serious decline. Sometime in the 11th century, a new stone church was built. Fragments of this remain in the west wall of the present cathedral. In the library, a painted stone from this period is preserved. The organ, built in 1775 and now set into a specially made organ chamber, once sat on a stone screen separating the choir, which was used for the daily office sung by the vicar's choral. The cathedral was rebuilt in roughly its present shape by, it is said, Mulla O'Brien, King of Munster, in the 12th century. In 1596, the Earl of Desmond, having recently been released from the Tower of London, led a rebellion against the crown, and in the process the cathedral was destroyed by the White Knight Edmund Fitzgibbon. In 1633, the Earl of Cork Richard Boyle rebuilt the choir. In the process, his builders used the rubble from the early destruction to make the huge walls. In the 1640s, with the arrival of Oliver Cromwell, their clergy were once again thrown out of their cathedral, but it was again restored in 1660. Sir William Robinson, who built the Royal Hospital in Kilmainham in Dublin, was asked by the Dean and Chapter to rebuild the rest of the cathedral. By the end of the 17th century, the choir was in a poor state, and Sir Richard Morrison, who designed Fota House in Cork, was asked to rebuild and redesign it. The south and east walls, the great east window, and 5 other windows, some of them blank, were set in on either side. A beautiful ceiling was constructed and decorated with magnificent flowery bosses and human faces. All were repainted under the direction of Dean Mays. Dean Mays brought the stone altar from St. Olaf's in Waterford, dated 1733, as well as the oak tile floor of the sanctuary, the rails, the screen, and the elaborate wooden pulpit. He furnished the Columba chapel with pebbles from Iona. The altar rails, and the wood panelling came from Villierstown. At the west end of the cathedral is the remarkable altar tomb of John and Catherine McGrath, a family of considerable repute in the area. At the east end of the tomb are St. Carthage, St. Catherine, and St. Patrick. On both sides of the tomb are carved the 12 apostles, together with several mystical beasts and skulls. On the top of the tomb are Christ with the instruments of the Passion and St. Gregory. The date of the tomb is 1543, and it is the best example of its kind in Ireland. Opposite the tomb, on the west wall of the cathedral, there are 9, 10 and 11th century inscribed stones. The inscriptions on the stones were as follows: Sweeney, son of Cuoder, a blessing on the soul of Colgan, a prayer for Donachad, a blessing on the soul of St. Martin, and a prayer for Colmac. These stones were discovered in 1827 when the foundations were being dug for the new bell tower and spire.